Hello there and welcome. Thanks for joining me today for some no-line watercoloring basics. My latest class from Altenew was Watercolor Basics and Beyond, and Jennifer really goes into different types of paper, transparencies and staining, as well as making your own glazing chart, which is really helpful when you're mixing colors and you're laying them over the top of each other to know what you're going to get. She shows lots of different techniques and has some great tips. I wanted to show some no-line watercoloring, and I thought the stamp set was perfect. This is the Wallpaper Art stamp set, and it has the stencils as well, and I also have the dies that I'll use later. This is the 36 pan watercolor set, and I just printed this out from Altenew's website, made my own chart. I'll use Altenew's watercolor paper pad in the 9x12, and it is 140 pound. I'll place a piece of that in my MISTI and use the Ink on 3 Fade Out No Line Coloring ink. Because of the texture on the watercolor paper, I'm going to stamp this at least a couple times, and I just walk my fingers over the top of it to get a good impression. I also like to stamp it a couple times just to make sure I can see it really good. I start with my darkest concentration of the color on the base of each petal. I paint every other petal so they have time to dry, and then I can come in and paint the one next to it so they don't bleed into each other. I'm using the Silver Black Velvet watercolor brushes, and this is a size 6. And I'm using the crimson color from the pan set. I like to just put that concentration of color in the corners and where there might be a fold in the petal. That really helps to push back that shaded area so it gives depth to the flower. You want your paint to stay wet so you can come in, and I cleaned off my brush, and now I'm just coming in with some clean water and pulling that color down. So I do this in about 3 steps. So the first step is the concentration of color. The second step, clean your brush off and pull it down. And then I come down about 3/4 of the way, and then I clean it off again and pull it down for the lightest color. I keep a paper towel handy so I can dab off the water when I clean my brush. You don't want to come in and put too much water on your paper. You really want your brush just wet and not dripping. I use the same technique for the other petal on the other side there. If I'm really being impatient after I'm done with that, I will come in and heat set it so I can continue with the petals in between. And also then I can lay more color down where I need some depth. You do run more of a risk of warping your paper with the heat gun than just letting it dry. But if you really can't wait, then you can do it. Just make sure you don't have your heat gun too close. I'll usually heat it from the back first and then come around to the front and kind of go back and forth, front and back. That'll help it from not warping as well. I'm kind of a slow colorer, so as those are drying, I'm just adding some more color on top to those corners for some more depth in those shaded areas. And it kind of helps push them back and make them look like they're underneath. I thought I would show these first couple petals so you could get the idea of the technique. Watercolor just takes some time and practice to figure out the style and the technique that you like. As I'm painting these, you can see the petals really starting to come live, and as I start to complete the flower, the whole thing really just looks very lifelike, and I think that's what no-line coloring really looks like. I've skipped ahead here so you don't have to watch me color the whole flower, but you're going to color each petal the same, like I said, and make sure you let them dry in between. That's how you get that separation on the petals. And I'm just coming in and adding some more depth into those darker areas and folds of the petals. I've only used the one color, crimson, to color this flower to this point. And you can see it's got all different kinds of gradations in that color. There are two areas on this particular flower that are kind of set down deep in. And I'm going to use, I added some grapevine to the crimson to add some depth into that deep area. After this is dry, you could come in with some color pencils to add some shade into those darker areas. Now I'm going to do the centers, and I'm going to use the warm sunshine first, and I do it about halfway around the edge of the center. And I'm just using kind of little, I call it pointillism, just kind of little dots in a way. Now I'm going to use the fresh lemon and do the other side of this. It'll just look like sun shining on it. And fill those in with the dots as well. So I'm just going to keep doing this, and I'm doing that first layer of dots, and then I'm going to let it dry. And then I'll do it again and layer them on top of each other, and that'll give some texture and make it look raised in the center. I did the same thing on both flowers and heat set them, and now I'm going to use the paper bag color in the pan set, and I'm going to put some more dots. I'm going to put a little concentration of brown in the center, but I'll put some all around in between even the yellow. I decided to use some of the espresso with the paper bag and just kind of alternate the browns. And when I'm done with that, I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to use a little bit of the white wash. The white wash is a little bit thicker, and it will help with the raised look of this. While I'm waiting for that layer of the center to dry, I'm going to start painting my leaves. And I'll do the same technique on the leaves as I did the flowers, starting with my most concentrated color on the base of the leaf, cleaning off my brush, and then pulling that color out, and then cleaning it off again, pulling it out a third time for the lightest color on the tip of the leaf. And I'll do each leaf that way. There are some open leaves and some solid leaves on these stamps. And for the open leaves, I'm going to put the solid color, the darkest color, again at the base, and then down the center of that leaf also. I want to kind of highlight the depth of that center of the leaf. On the smaller leaves, the more solid ones, I'm really not going to shade them that much because they're so solid with the stamping. The trick to this technique is really dabbing off your water on your brush so you don't have that water on it. And if you get too much on the paper, you can always use that paper towel to wick it up and kind of start again. The colors I chose to use on the leaves are evergreen for the most part, and a little bit of frayed leaf sometimes on the very tip of it if I need more color. And then moonrock I'm using at the base and down the center if I need to push that back with some more depth. And I'm using the evergreen also on the stems. And now I've changed to my size 2 brush. The stems are super fine, and I just find it easier with a smaller brush. I forgot to mention that I'm using the medium-sized palette to put all my paint on. I take it out of the pan set and put it on the palette and add a little bit of water to it so I'm not taking it out so concentrated from the pan set. Now that the leaves are done, I'm going to come back to the centers of the flowers and add some more paint on top of those in the dot motion again, and just build that up for some dimension, and it really adds a lot of texture also. I'm using some of the metallic watercolor now in the gold pearl, and that'll really just help give it some shine and really make it stand out. I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to use the Posca paint pen, and this is a 0.1 fine, and layer that on top. So with all these layers, you really get that dimension out of it and texture. I'm going to start on my background panel, and I'm using the Gold Pearl metallic watercolor and Altenew water brush. And I'm just dripping that color down a piece of Nina Solar White 110 pound. I know this is not watercolor paper, but if you're not putting too much on it, it's fine. I try to let this dry on its own to prevent warping, and if it's a little bit warped, it'll flatten out. After I'm done with that, I'm going to add some pink flicks on this with the same water brush and pink color. I used the Garden Trellis cover die from Altenew and cut it out of white cardstock. And I'm going to put that over the top of that dripped panel that I just made. The sentiment is from the Wallpaper Art stamp set, and I embossed it with some gold fine embossing powder on a platinum vellum. I used the E6000 spray adhesive to put that garden trellis on the background. And now I'm just putting all my flowers and leaves on the panel, and I put some foam tape behind that large petal on the bottom. I tucked the vellum sentiment underneath the leaves, and just on the outside edge, I'm going to use a little brush and some of the E6000 to kind of conceal my adhesive. I'm really pleased how this card turned out. And also, here's another one that I made just using some loose watercolor, and I embossed the stamp this time and used the 3 flowers, but everything is pretty much the same except for the blush cardstock in back of it and making it a horizontal card. I really enjoy watercoloring, and especially the no-line watercolor. This is a fun one also with the loose watercolor, and it's amazing how the same stamp can look so different. I added a few more colors to this, and they're fun to watch just blend together. But both techniques are really fun. I hope you enjoyed watching me watercolor, and here's a couple more videos. I really appreciate the time you spent with me, and I hope you have a great day and do something you love.